This is for Palestine, Ramallah, West Bank, Gaza. This is for the child that is searching for an answer. This is not just a war over stolen land. Why do you think little boys are throwing stones at tanks? And we'll never really know how many people are dead. They drop bombs on innocent girls while they sleep in their bed. Israel is a terror state, they're terrorists that terrorize. I'll testify my television, televise, I'm telling lies. How many more resolutions have to be violated? How many more children have to be annihilated? This is not a war, it is systematic genocide. But whatever they try, Palestine will never die. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Hello, I'm Chris Williamson, and you're watching Palestine Declassified. We're the only weekly TV show focusing on investigating and exposing the Israeli regime's global war against solidarity with the illegally occupied people of Palestine. In this week's show, we'll be evaluating the record of Henry Kissinger. He was one of the most influential US statesmen of the 20th century. And as a hardcore Zionist, he shamelessly used his position to manipulate the United States into providing unequivocal support to Israel. Kissinger was incredibly Machiavellian, but unlike his modern-day equivalents, he wasn't stupid and he certainly wasn't demented. Kissinger was also the architect of some of the 20th century's worst human rights abuses and war crimes. Latifa Abu-Chakra has been looking back at Henry Kissinger's life and legacy.
The passing of a war criminal, the death of Henry A. Kissinger at 100 years old, marks the end of a bloody life. Kissinger is well known for his role in engineering the coup that brought General Pinochet to power in Chile and overthrowing the democratically elected leader Salvador Allende. Kissinger's fingerprints were all over the wars, from Vietnam to Cambodia to East Timor to Bangladesh. Less well known, though, is Kissinger's role in the neutralization of Egypt as an effective actor in the struggle against Zionism and the marginalization of Palestinians by regional allies. It's fair to say you would not have the same level of Egyptian complicity that you have today, including the genocidal blockade of Gaza at Rafah crossing, without Kissinger's work to subvert the powerful Arab state. As Secretary of State under Richard Nixon, Kissinger was intimately involved in saving Israel in the 1973 war of attrition fought by Syria, Egypt, and Libya against the settler entity. When the Zionists suffered consecutive losses, Kissinger and Nixon organized for the emergency supply of weapons to the entity in a move known as Operation Nickel Grass. The operation consisted of the US Air Force Military Airlift Command delivering 22,325 tons of tanks, ammunition, and military equipment over 32 days directly to the battlefield. Following the war, Egyptian leader Anwar Sadat sent a secret message to Zionist Prime Minister Golda Meir. "When I threatened war, I meant it. When I talk of peace now, I mean it. We have never had contact before. We now have the services of Dr. Kissinger. Let us use him and talk to each other through him," asserted Sadat. It was Kissinger who took Sadat under his wing and convinced him of the benefit of normalizing with the temporary entity. And this work culminated with the visit of the Egyptian leader to Israeli parliament, where he addressed the Israeli political elite, stating his desire for peace with the entity. The infrastructure of collaboration that was set up during his time remains in place to this day. When marking the death of Kissinger, Israeli President Isaac Herzog credited the former US Secretary of State with laying the cornerstone of the peace agreement between Egypt and the Zionist entity. Israel lobbyist and former US Ambassador to Israel, Martin Indyk, wrote a book about Kissinger's political career with a special concentration on his services to Israel. In 1981, in reference to his diplomatic work in the Middle East, Kissinger asserted that his main objective was to isolate the Palestinians. The truth is, Palestinians are not isolated, and support for them has outlived Henry Kissinger.
As always, we're joined by our resident expert, David Miller. David's an academic and a former professor at Bristol University, and is now a non-resident senior research fellow at the Centre for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zeyim University. He's also a co-director of the lobbying watchdog Spinwatch, and is a leading British scholarly critic of Israel. David joins us today via Skype from Bristol in the UK. Our guest today is the commentator and international relations analyst Scott Ritter, who I spoke to earlier via Skype and he joined us from New York City in the United States. Scott was the chief weapons inspector with the United Nations in Iraq from 1991 until 1998, and he previously served in the US Marine Corps for 20 years. He's also produced a number of documentary films, including Shifting Sands, The Truth About Iraq, and as an author, his books include Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika and Iraq Confidential. Welcome to the show. David, what would you say Kissinger's best known for today?
Well, if you look on Google, he's known for being a man of peace, for bringing China into the global system, and for helping with the Middle East peace process. But of course, the main thing that he's known for is the secret bombing of Cambodia, which he accomplished with Richard Nixon. And there's a famous song in Bristol which refers to this and talks about how Nixon and Kissinger should be tried for war crimes for the secret bombing of Cambodia. That was an attempt to directly bomb a country which wasn't involved in the conflict in Vietnam, in order that they could try and defeat the Vietnamese Communist Party. And of course, they failed in that effort. But that was a huge crime against humanity. The use of the defoliants of Agent Orange, the chemical after effects that there were on Vietnamese people for generations, still to this day, is a key war crime of the century. Let's also remember, of course, as was referred to in the film there, the role he played in the coup in Chile in 1973, when the democratically elected socialist president Salvador Allende was removed from power by a military coup. Now, that was a coup which was not planned by the State Department. The State Department had a strategy for undermining the government of Allende, but there was a secret strategy run by the CIA, which Kissinger was party to, which was about encouraging senior people in the military to undermine Allende and to bring forward the coup in such a way that what they had to do was to remove the most senior general, who was thought to be too much of a constitutionalist to go along with their plans. So a litany of human rights abuses.
Yes, indeed. Well, I started by asking Scott what his estimation was of Kissinger as a Secretary of State.
I think Henry Kissinger will go down in history as one of the greatest Secretary of States in the history of the United States. When I say great, that doesn't mean that he was, the epitome of a good man or a good person. The Secretary of State doesn't exist to be a good man or a good person. The Secretary of State exists to implement policies that are beneficial for the United States of America. And there has been no Secretary of State that has matched Henry Kissinger in this regard. What he did in terms of promoting American power and positioning America globally is unprecedented. And he has set a very high standard that, like as I mentioned before, no Secretary of State since then has come close to matching.
David, what would you say Egypt's role is in today's war on Gaza?
Well, we know, don't we? Because, this notion that the Rafah crossing is closed and it can only be opened when the Zionist regime says it can be opened is a nonsense. The role of the Arab states ought to be to support the Palestinians and indeed to pressure the Zionist entity to open the crossings, and indeed to make sure that the crossings are opened and that material can flow into Gaza. But this, of course, is the historic role which Egypt has been required to play by the Western powers. We saw in the film there the role of Sadat in relation to the peace process there, that they called it, the normalization of Zionism. And what, of course, let's remember happened in Egypt was that in the Arab Spring, the dictator, the pro-Western dictator, was removed and was replaced by a president who was sympathetic towards the Palestinians. And of course, that couldn't stand. And that's why the West backed the coup, which removed the democratically elected government of Egypt. And we now have, of course, a dictator in Egypt who is content to collaborate very closely with the West and indeed with the Zionists. And that, of course, is a tale which one can tell about a number of different Arab states in the region.
Yeah, of course. Well, I then asked Scott if it was true that Kissinger laid the foundation for where we are today in terms of Egypt and the Palestinians.
Well, there's no doubt that Henry Kissinger played an important role in creating the foundation of the situation we face vis-a-vis Palestine today. But I think, in fairness, we have to understand that his goal was never to solve the Palestinian problem. That was a goal of Richard Nixon, the president. But Henry Kissinger, he had a vision that was focused on getting Egypt away from the Soviet orbit, to redefine Middle Eastern relations where the United States was the preeminent source of influence. And he used the Arab-Israeli conflict to achieve that. But his primary goal wasn't to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians. His primary goal was to exploit the conflict between Israel and the Arab world to get Egypt lured away from that so that he could use Egypt as a vector of American influence in the region. And this, he was extremely successful.
David, would you say that Kissinger succeeded in isolating the Palestinians?
Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, yes, in the sense that the peace process, as it was called in 1993, the Oslo Accords, were a mechanism for subordinating the Palestinians, giving the Palestinian Authority a very minor concessions in order that they would throw away all of their trump cards, in particular recognizing Israel and abandoning armed resistance. So in that sense, that was the process which Kissinger played into and helped to put in place. But of course, as the film showed, today the Palestinians are not in that position. Today the Palestinians are, as we see every day, resisting the Zionist entity's genocidal assault on Palestinian civilians, and that's an indication of the way in which the Palestinian people have been able, despite being abandoned by many allies, to stand firm against the apartheid regime and against the genocide of the Zionist entity.
Yeah. Well, I also asked Scott what happened to Anwar Sadat after he followed Kissinger's directions.
Well, I mean, ultimately, Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981 by Islamists within the Egyptian military, loyal to the Muslim Brotherhood, who took umbrage over Egypt's close relationship with Israel, Egypt making peace with Israel. So ultimately, because Henry Kissinger was the man who brokered that peace, started the path towards peace. Remember, he left office when Gerald Ford was defeated by Jimmy Carter. It was Jimmy Carter that picked up the mantle of Arab-Israeli peace, and it was Jimmy Carter who, made the Camp David peace accords a reality. But this was all started by Henry Kissinger.
Well, we'll come back to the discussion in a moment after our next report about the Likud Party's plans to assassinate Henry Kissinger in 1977.
Despite his services to the Zionist entity in neutralizing Egypt, there were some in the Israeli political arena who could not trust Henry Kissinger and saw his activity as harming the Zionist project, while his work on normalization was carried out in lockstep with the Israeli Labour Party. The right-wing Likud Party, which currently governs the Zionist entity, was deeply opposed to him. U.S. State Department officials leaked the story to the New York Daily News in 1977 that the Likud Party had put a $150,000 contract for the assassination of Kissinger. At first, it was claimed that the threat emanated from Palestinian groups aware of his work in isolating them, but it was later described as a, quote, a small radical splinter faction within Israel's Likud opposition bloc. End quote. What is the truth? Was this merely U.S. State Department propaganda to depict Kissinger as somehow an unbiased neutral arbitrator between the two sides? Or was the threat genuine? As we've previously revealed on Palestine Declassified, Likud's leader Netanyahu did later threaten Bill Clinton with tapes of his affair with Monica Lewinsky in an effort to secure the release of Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard. It is not beyond the realms of possibility that Likud sought to liquidate Kissinger despite his services to the Zionist cause.
Well, I asked Scott what he made of the reports that some members of the Likud party wanted to assassinate Kissinger in the 1970s.
Well, apparently the reports are true. The Likud party denies it. They said that, worst case, it was an extreme faction of the Likud party acting independently of the Likud party itself. But, the principal interlocutor for Henry Kissinger in Israel were representatives of the Labor Party. And so the Likud party was feeling isolated, was feeling minimized, and was feeling threatened because the initiatives that Henry Kissinger was putting Israel down were not initiatives that the Likud party believed best represented their vision of what Israel should be. And so I think they took umbrage at what Henry Kissinger was doing, and either collectively or through a rogue operative, initiated the processes, putting money on the table to get Henry Kissinger assassinated.
David, would you say that that would have been out of character for Likud had they gone through with that?
Well, of course not. I mean, Likud comes out of the Irgun, the far-right terror gang, which helped to set up the State of Israel, as it was called, back in 1948. They were involved in the bombing of the King David Hotel, which, of course, killed many civilians, and were engaged in all sorts of atrocities during the Nakba, during the ethnic cleansing, which set up the Zionist regime, the Zionist entity. And, of course, since then, both the Labour Party and Likud have engaged Mossad in assassination missions around the world against, for example, people assumed or assessed to be part of the Palestinian resistance, both from Fatah and then later from Hamas and other Palestinian resistance factions. So yes, of course they would do this kind of thing. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility at all, and it seems to have been the case.
Yeah. Well, I asked Scott about Israel coming into existence in 1948 after a campaign of terrorism.
There can be no doubt that the Israel that was envisioned by the United Nations and the Israel that was envisioned by the founding fathers of Israel were two completely different entities. The Israel that existed because of the actions of the founding fathers was an Israel that was born from violence, the terrorism that led to the Nakba, or the catastrophe, the murder of thousands of Palestinians and the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes by the Israelis through threat of violence, through actual violence, casting them into refugee camps, casting them away from their homeland. This is the reality of modern day Israel. We can't say that Israel is a nation born of peace. Israel is a nation that has always been born on the back of violence committed by Israelis against the Palestinians, because the Israel envisioned by the Zionists, by the founding fathers of Israel, was an Israel that couldn't exist unless the Palestinian people were disenfranchised, removed from their homes, from their land, and that any notion of an independent Palestinian state be quashed or eliminated. This is the reality of Israel.
David, I mean, so Likud aren't natural allies of the United States, are they, even though President Biden's throwing money at them like it's going out of fashion?
I think that's the wrong way to think of it. I think really what you've got to understand is that Likud and indeed the other Zionist parties have always attempted to penetrate and subvert US government and policy, like they have with the UK and other countries, to pursue their own interests, in order that they got, for example, the nuclear bomb, and in order that they were able to, in the creation of the state, bring weapons from the US to kill the Palestinians and expel them. They see themselves as having interests which are not necessarily the same as the US. If they can penetrate the US and make it do what they want, which mainly they think they can, then they're happy. But if they can't, then they will fight.
Well, I then asked Scott how important he thought Operation Nickel Grass was to the 1973 war.
Well, Operation Nickel Grass was the American resupply of the Israeli Defense Forces during the Yom Kippur War in 1973. When Israel was attacked by Egypt, by Syria, Israel sustained horrific losses in manpower and, more critically, in equipment. Tanks, aircraft, ammunition, the things that Israel would need not only to defend themselves, but to go back on the offensive and to reclaim the strategic initiative, they lacked. Europe wasn't going to provide them with any weapons. So Operation Nickel Grass was a scheme put in place largely because of the vision of Henry Kissinger to resupply Israel, to send Israel the tanks, the aircraft, the ammunition that they needed to successfully wage this war. It was essential. Without this, Israel couldn't have won the war. Israel would have suffered a strategic defeat. And Henry Kissinger, he's not the biggest fan of Israel, but he recognized the utility of Israel in achieving broader American foreign policy objectives in the Middle East. One of the things that he has, been associated with in terms of thoughts is that it was important for Israel to suffer losses, significant losses, but not a strategic defeat. And so Operation Nickel Grass, it didn't happen immediately. There was a delay built in. Some people believe that the final trigger for the release of this American aid was Golda Meir's threat to use nuclear weapons. Other people believe that it was just delayed until Henry Kissinger determined that Israel had suffered sufficiently to put it in its place in any post-war negotiations. But Nickel Grass saved Israel, but it also, because of the way in which it was implemented, it helped position the United States to be more influential in post-conflict negotiations.
Well, finally, briefly, David, how important would you say the support from the United States is for Israel today?
Well, everyone can see that it's crucial. I mean, the sailing of the fleet to the Eastern Med, the aircraft carriers, the supplies of the shells and the missiles which the Americans have given, the way in which Biden has pushed through without congressional oversight the shipping of more weapons to the Zionists. It's crucial. They couldn't do what they are doing without American support. So while the Americans might say, oh, there's too much killing or it's disproportionate or little words like that, at the same time, what they're doing is facilitating it directly by sending weaponry.
Well, I'm afraid the clock's beaten us again, so that's it for another show as we're out of time. I'd like to thank our guest, Scott Ritter, and of course our resident expert, Professor David Miller. Palestine Declassified will be back next week with more forensic investigations and analysis. And in the meantime, you can follow the show on Facebook, Twitter and Telegram, where we post regular clips and updates. And remember to share today's programme on your social media platforms too. So until next time, this is Chris Williamson saying bye for now.